We're very pleased to have three great panelists join us for this first segment. We have the Executive Vice President and Co-COO of Dominion Energy, Diane Leopold, the President and CEO of S&P Global, Doug Peterson, and the Vice President of Amazon Global Air, Sarah Rhodes. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage. I don't know how I get around here. It's a tight fit. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's great to have you with us.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
You guys all ready to get started? Well, let's begin with a few introductory remarks from each of you. Maybe, Diane, I'll begin with you to maybe share a little bit about Dominion's perspectives as a major utility.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Governor Hogan and the Governors Association here. It's a pivotal time in the nation's energy economy. And with the focus for the entire economy on rapid decarbonization, energy is certainly at the forefront of it to try to address climate change. So in my opening remarks, I'd like to talk about what we've already done as a leader, what we're doing now, and where we look to go. So on the what we've done, over the last, since 2005, we've reduced our carbon footprint by 50%. And we're looking to get to 80%, we've already committed to it, by 2050. A lot of it has been from coal to gas conversion that has gone on over the last 15 years. And in the future, to get to the 80%, continue that conversion as well as rapid deployment of renewables. On the methane emissions side for our gas infrastructure, we've already reduced 25% of our methane emissions in the last 10 years, and we've committed to getting to 50% in the next 10 years. But we're determined to go further than that, and much further than that. So what we're working on now is a very large and rapid deployment quickly of solar and offshore wind. We've announced the largest offshore wind facility in the country to be installed over the next coming years. And we're the fourth largest solar developer in the country. We're extending the licenses of our nuclear fleet, which is carbon-free generation. We are going to continue the coal to gas conversion and the methane emissions reductions that we have been doing. And then we're focusing on technologies such as energy storage and hydrogen and other emerging technologies. And then what we're looking to do after we look at ourselves is what can we do in our communities to help decarbonize the economy more broadly. As an example, electric vehicle charging stations. We've announced the largest conversion of diesel school buses to electric school buses. It helps lower greenhouse gases, it helps with other pollutions and childhood asthma, and it acts as actually a utility scale battery when those buses aren't in use. We've also announced the largest nationwide program of renewable natural gas, with partnerships with hog and dairy farmers throughout the country to capture methane that's escaping into the air and have it used for end use. It's actually carbon negative or carbon beneficial. And of course, Governor, in your home state at Cove Point, the customers, our allies in India and Japan, are using the liquefied natural gas from our terminal to move the coal to gas conversion in those countries also. So in the next 5 years, we've committed to $26 billion of private investment. We are focused on emerging technologies, and what we need is regulatory and legislative partnerships to be able to have that happen so we can continue affordable, safe, reliable, secure, and clean energy.
Well, thank you very much. Doug, you come at the issue as both President and CEO of S&P Global and as well as the co-chair of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Executive Council on Infrastructure. So how are you approaching these issues?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me today. It's great to be with the governors. And when I think about infrastructure, one of the best places to be is with governors, because as chief executive officers of your states, you have authority, you have legislatures, you have the opportunity to invest in infrastructure, and you can do it fast. When I joined the business, when the Bipartisan Policy Center to look at infrastructure, we took a step back to see what are the ways that the private sector can make a more positive impact. And let me talk about two of those. The first has to do with financing. I know as governors, when you look at the budgets that you have gaps, and the infrastructure need in this country is huge. And we can make a case for infrastructure, clearly. It creates jobs. It creates the opportunity for growth. Every dollar of investment in infrastructure creates about $3.70 worth of growth over the next 20 years, beyond that initial dollar of infrastructure investment. And it also creates pride. You can see, and we heard about the opportunity to upgrade our environmental impact when you create new infrastructure. So how can you get the private sector financing into the infrastructure space? We're going to hear later from the Canadian premiers. Canada has done a fantastic job using pension money and insurance money. Why do we talk about pension money, insurance money? It's long-term investments, and one of the best financial matches is infrastructure, which is a long-term investment. So you have this match of the funds. There are literally trillions of dollars of funds around the globe, and right now that private sector funding for infrastructure is going to Australia, to Canada, to the UK, to Spain. And even infrastructure investors in the United States are investing overseas because there's a lack of projects. So this, I would highly endorse your program. This is a program you've talked about, the different opportunities for design, build, operate. You don't have transfer here, but that's another one, design, build, operate, transfer. And financing is part of that. So the first appeal I'd make is to look for new ways to bring private sector finance into infrastructure, and there's many ways to do that. The second thing I would appeal to all of you is to look at the quality of your public-private partnership laws at the state level. There are today 33 states that have P3 laws. Only about half of those have been used effectively, so there's about half of those that have not really been used effectively, and that leaves 17 states that don't have P3 laws at all. And the private sector is looking at new ways to get involved in infrastructure, whether that's what I just talked about, design, it's the build, it's the operate, it's the transfer. There's many different ways to do it. It doesn't have to always be through concessions. It doesn't always have to be through privatization-like programs. You have a case like the Long Beach courthouse, which is a long-term contract that's built with very high-quality standards of materials that will be handed back to the Long Beach city at the end of the contract. The last point I make very quickly, I'm sure we'll come back to it, is permitting. So the last thing is that if you're looking at a bridge and you want to have somebody build that bridge, will the banks finance something that they have to wait 5 years or 7 years or 10 years before they even know if the bridge is going to take place? Will the company that's building the design, will they put millions of dollars into the design to have to wait 7 years or 10 years to find out if they even won? So permitting is also one of the barriers. And again, as governors, you have a lot of authority to make this happen.
Thank you, Doug. So, Sarah, Amazon is both a user and a partner in infrastructure, and how does Amazon Global Air touch on the pillars of this initiative? And since freight moves across so many different modes, including our airports, highways, rail, and ports, what can states do, in your estimation, to kind of modernize their transportation networks across modes?
Well, first of all, thank you, Governor Hogan, and thank you to the National Governors Association for your focus on infrastructure. And it truly is a privilege to be here with such a distinguished group of visionary leaders. Just by brief introduction, as you mentioned, I'm Sarah Rhodes. I lead Amazon's global air business. I'm originally from the great state of Montana and spent 4 years at the Naval Academy in Governor Hogan's beautiful state of Maryland. And I've had the privilege of living and working in 11 states that are represented here today. I began my Amazon career about 9 years ago as an operations manager with Amazon in Governor Beshear's Bluegrass State, and recently settled in Governor Inslee's Evergreen State to build out an air haul network.
Pretty good the way you covered all those bases.
Well, trying to connect with everybody. So I still have about 46 other governors to get through, I think. But no, I did. Prior to my time with Amazon, I did spend several years in the Navy as a Navy F-18 fighter pilot. So for the veterans in the audience, thank you very much for your service. I definitely appreciate what that means. So getting back to your question, Governor, first of all, since 1997, Amazon has been building a network of fulfillment centers across the country. And these fulfillment centers are as large as about 1.2 million square feet. And within these fulfillment centers are its product. And this product is picked, packed, and shipped on a daily basis. And these fulfillment centers are powered by our outstanding workforce and delivery partners. And we have over 500,000 employees across 40 states. And we're very proud to say that we have an industry-leading minimum wage of $15 an hour and benefits on day one. So we definitely value the workforce that we have. More recently, our Amazon Transportation Solutions, we've emerged and have been investing in things like leasing aircraft, like building sortation facilities on airport, like purchasing trucks and trailers and electric vehicles. And we have enabled entrepreneurs to really build out their own small businesses to deliver packages on Amazon's behalf. We've also invested in innovative technologies in the final mile delivery service. So that last portion of the supply chain that gets that package to your doorstep, we've really leaned into technology in that space. For my portion of this wider supply chain, I focus obviously on aircraft. We currently have 50 aircraft that fly across the country. We'll have 70 aircraft by the end of this year. These aircraft are 767 and 737 large wing aircraft. And we have also invested on airport sortation facilities as well as other gateways across 26 airports in the country. So it really is amazing. For the first time this past year, we have Amazon employees loading, unloading, and marshaling aircraft for the first time ever. And even when I joined Amazon 9 years ago, it certainly wasn't a thought that an e-commerce company would be building out an air haul network. Now, of course, to make all of this happen, we need things like ports and railroads and airports and roads. We rely on the proximity of this infrastructure. And while it's not a primary driver of our decisions whether or not to invest in an area, the infrastructure and the accessibility and the proximity of these important factors certainly are a variable in our decision-making process. As mentioned, of course, we wouldn't be able to do this without our workforce, so it's also very important to us that our employees have the ability to get to and from work in an efficient and simple way. So maybe as an example, in Governor Hogan's state, we have 2 fulfillment centers in Baltimore, and we've just expanded our air operation at BWI Airport. We have hundreds of employees who use public transportation on a daily basis and rely on the roads and the infrastructure to get them to and from work. So I'm certainly looking forward to the discussion today. I am a believer that speed really does matter in business, and modes and nodes connect our world, and I look forward to really focusing on infrastructure and answering questions today.
Thank you, Sarah. So a question for all of you. You all come at it from a different perspective, and I think the governors want to hear and get your input and advice from where you're coming from. Where do you think, with your perspective, where are our systems and processes falling short, and where can states seize on opportunities to kind of improve on our infrastructure?
Okay, thank you. So with the opening remarks that I had in working to reduce our environmental footprint, particularly in energy, because energy drives so much of the economy and the infrastructure, I think we all have the same goals to reduce the environmental footprint as fast as possible. What I would say what goes on in the states, and some of this will be what Doug talked about in the permitting, is that restrictive permitting and local ordinances and other issues such as that in the states sometimes actually have the unintended consequence while we're trying to get to that same end goal. If we want to reduce as fast as possible, we actually end up with some of the permitting issues increasing greenhouse gases, increasing our pollution, and actually having our aging infrastructure not be able to be replaced in a timely manner. So certainly streamlining of permitting. Nobody's looking for any kind of rubber stamp, but a clear, consistent, reliable, and timely process is essential. We're investing $26 billion, and to be able to do that, to be able to finance it, it's just critical that there's that clear process to be able to go through. And then sometimes to understand and accept that if we want to get to that end goal and we want to try to do it as quickly as possible, we need to be able to install and keep running our baseload, high efficiency, dispatchable generation if we want the most rapid deployment of renewables possible, which is, I believe, what everybody wants.
Good points. Doug?
Yeah, let me make 2 points. The first is a knowledge of what are the assets that are in your state. You would be surprised at how many states don't have a centralized organization. It's dispersed across the entire state of what are the assets, what are the bridges, what are the ports, what are the even buildings that are owned. This is something that's absolutely critical. The state of Pennsylvania, I see Governor Wolf over here, they put together a program where they have a concession for 558 bridges. So as a bundling of their bridge assets to have them maintained and rebuilt over a period that was about a third of what would have taken if it would not have been done by the private sector. So but you could have never done that if you didn't have the inventory of the assets. In addition, the financial markets are looking for an inventory, so to speak, of projects in a pipeline. Governor Cuomo would not have been able to perform the project at LaGuardia to renew the airport there if there hadn't been a pipeline of projects which were known by the financial markets that are coming up in New York State that they can start planning for. So the first is having inventory assets and a pipeline of projects. And the second is really about how do you think about infrastructure? In too many places, I've seen infrastructure is thought about as procurement. It's the annual budget cycle, and it's not an annual budget cycle. Infrastructure has to be thought of as a life cycle investment over the long term. So the word investment, not procurement. States need to look at as an investment in infrastructure and all the benefits it brings, not as annual procurement.
Thank you. Sarah?
I think taking a proactive versus a reactive approach, and I think about a term that we use at Amazon often, and it's looking around corners. And I'll give 2 examples, Florida and Illinois, as it relates to our business. And I use the famous quote from Field of Dreams, "If you build it, they will come." And I think about the facility that we're building right now in Lakeland, Florida, that will launch this summer, as well as our expansion that we just completed last year in Rockford, Illinois, where we partnered with the airport and the local, state, and federal government representatives to really do something that was mutually beneficial for both the business as well as the local community and the state. So they leaned in, did an investment before we really were committed to operating out of those sites, and it became a great relationship and partnership between our Amazon Air organization and the Rockford and Lakeland communities.
Thank you. So Doug, public-private partnerships have been around for a while, but they're still, as you mentioned, fairly underutilized. And some states are taking advantage, some are not. How, and it's a discussion some of us are having, how should states evaluate whether or not a P3 might be something they ought to consider? How should they balance the risks between the public and private sector?
Well, one of the words you used, risk, is critical, and I'll come to that. So first of all, the public-private partnerships, I think they become an imperative because states don't have the financial resources to undertake the amount of infrastructure investment which is going to be required to meet the needs of Amazon and Dominion. If you think about where we're going to be heading with the modernizing our infrastructure, updating it, and we also heard that there is a demand from my children and new generations coming up to have a completely different approach to the environment and sustainability of our infrastructure. And when you look at that renewal, having the public-private partnership is one of the best ways to do that. So when you look at it, first of all, you can use it for financing, you can use it for models of design. You have them here in your foundational principles. And to put together this approach, when I worked as the co-chair of the Bipartisan Policy Center Executive Committee on Infrastructure, we put in place an ideal or a draft of a proposed P3 law, that which we think all states could look at to see if the P3 law they already have is going to meet these standards, or if they don't have one, they can use this as a base standard for a P3 law. In addition to financing, you have the idea of risk sharing. Who's going to take the risk? You can put the risk back to the private sector. The private sector is willing to underwrite projects and take risk much more than they would if it's if they were not going to operate. So there's an opportunity to bring the financing, to have the risk sharing, and then one of the things you have to overcome though is it's still true that people think that infrastructure should be owned by the government. There's this question about who does have the responsibility for infrastructure, and through a P3 law you can be very clear about what are the roles and risks and responsibilities along the entire value chain of infrastructure. And good P3 laws also define very specifically who's taking the risk, who has the responsibility, and you can transfer that to the public sector, to the private sector.
Great, thank you. Diane, so you talked to something about investing in some of the serious technological advances in your industry. Can you talk a little bit about some of the innovations and technologies that you're most focused on?
Sure. I'd probably put it into two categories. For those technologies that have been deployed for a while right now, how can you drive down the cost? How can you improve the efficiency? So as a couple of examples, you think about the car you're driving and the fuel efficiency, or the computers you're buying are so much cheaper and a lot more juice in them, and you get so much more memory than you used to. So offshore wind, just 10 years ago, if we would put in a wind turbine on land, it was less than 1 megawatt. We now have 2 test turbines going in offshore Virginia that are now 6 megawatts. And the ones that we will be installing in the largest offshore wind facility that we just announced are going to be 12 megawatts or even more. So the newer technology, so you think in the same environmental footprint, investing in that technology to drive costs down and the scale and the size up, having more solar power be created with a smaller environmental footprint. So we're investing and focusing a lot of those technologies to be able to get more. The advanced combined cycles for natural gas are 25–30% more efficient than they were just 10 years ago, so fuel efficiency. Then it's focusing on new technologies that can really drive us down to a new level in greenhouse gases and pollution and energy, such as energy storage and batteries, hydrogen, advanced nuclear, those types of technologies that are not here yet, but we need to be able to pilot and drive those to be able to really move our energy economy forward.
Thank you. Sarah, from a shipping and freight perspective, what are some of the emerging technology opportunities for states to enhance efficiency and maybe reduce congestion or speed up delivery?
Well, first of all, I would encourage states to use data and facts and leverage things like technology and machine learning to, first of all, provide an informed set of information to then drive informed decisions. That's the approach that we've taken. And for example, instead of building out an air haul network that's a traditional hub and spoke, where all the aircraft fly into one location, everything's sorted, and then they fly out, we actually have an overlay of hub and spoke and a point-to-point network that is a result of really complex algorithms to drive a simple solution, which has resulted in a reduction in the number of aircraft actually required to fly the same amount of packages. So it's good from a sustainability perspective, it's good for efficiency, it's good for cost. So out of data and information came the decision to build out our network like that. And also, just to touch on sustainability, we're certainly leaning in that space as well. We're investing in electric ground service equipment. I think about our facility at Alliance Fort Worth in Texas. We are the launch customer of the world's first electric main deck loader. So the piece of equipment that loads the containers onto our large 767 aircraft. So it's been great, really experimenting and trialing that type of technology and equipment in our space.
Great, thank you. At this point, we're going to open it up to let some of our other governors get into the discussion. So please, we want to light up some lights and start asking some questions of our panelists. Governor Cuomo.
Thank you very much, Governor Hogan, and thank you to all the members of the panel. P3, as you said, and Governor Hogan said, has been around a long time, and money is a problem, right, on top of everything else, the permitting, et cetera. What do you think are the most, have replicable models developed on the P3 process, and what are the most replicable P3s that you've done?
Well, first of all, I have, when we did the Bipartisan Policy Center, we went and did field trips to different cities. We went to Detroit, to Miami, to Long Beach, to New York. We went to Virginia and visited Richmond. And what we saw were different examples of what works in a P3. And I mentioned earlier that one of the most important aspects is to think about it as an investment, not through procurement. And when you do a P3, it actually forces you into that methodology, because you're saying that this project, which is going to be managed with a public-private partnership, requires a different sort of a discipline when it just is a procurement project. So just having the project itself is critical. Another aspect is what is included in this infrastructure for success, the foundation for success, is a definition of all the different aspects along the way. There's a design aspect, there's a build aspect, there's an operate aspect, there's a finance aspect, a maintain aspect, the transfer either privately run after or before. And so there's different models. There's best practices, the Port of Miami, the tunnel at the Port of Miami, the Long Beach City Courthouse, the port at Richmond, Virginia. You have LaGuardia in New York. So there are a lot of very good practices that could be learned and copied. Usually we hear about the failures, and there are some failures. There's some roads that failed. And just to echo the comments about data and analytics, there are now more than ever opportunities to use data and analytics for different sorts of variable pricing. We're looking now, I live in New York, and we're looking in New York how we're going to have different sorts of variable pricing in the city. Hong Kong and Singapore have variable pricing. London has it. It works for transit. So there's a lot of models, and one of the best things to do, working with Governor Hogan, would be to get a group together of governors, and we'd love to work with you to find all of those best practices and share them across all the states.
Thank you. You guys are being much too quiet. We have an opportunity to talk to some really smart experts here. You guys have to wake up, ask some questions. Well, while you're thinking of your next question, I'll fill in and ask another one then.
We're here.
You have a question?
Go ahead. Governor, please.
So Guam is way out in the Pacific Ocean, and we have a lot of sun out there. Can you speak to the role of solar energy in this whole process and presentation that you made?
Sure. It plays an absolute critical role in being able to move towards a net zero or zero carbon economy and be able to address decarbonization. So we've been putting in about 1,000 megawatts of solar a year, so it certainly plays a role. But battery technology really needs to be coupled with it, and I would give you twofold. There's the batteries that a lot of the technology for batteries has started from the electric vehicle sector, so it does tend to be 4 to 8 hour batteries. Very helpful for a lot of the picture, but to be able to have a secure, reliable energy grid, need to actually have multi-day storage also. So if there does happen to be a storm that goes through for several days, batteries with solar can handle an enormous amount. So by installing that rapidly, as California and North Carolina and other states have started to do, it can address decarbonizing very quickly, but to have a secure grid, you do need to have multi-day storage and dispatchable baseload generation partnering with it as you continue that journey.
I'll add as well. I think about our fulfillment centers that I mentioned. We have solar panels on top of over 50 fulfillment centers across the United States, including on top of Governor Hogan's fulfillment center in Baltimore. We're building out a large central hub at the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport, and we're planning on putting solar panel on top of that facility as well to put energy back into the grid. So it's certainly something that we're thinking about both on the business and commercial side in addition to the utilities.
So several of you touched on kind of the regulatory landscape and permitting, the regulatory process. And it's an issue that we hear a lot about, both at the federal and state level. And so, and it's something governors are concerned about and the private sector is concerned about. What do you see as some of the opportunities for governors to support streamlining and bringing about maybe more transparency and a clearer process for the permitting and for infrastructure?
So what I've seen is that the fastest way to do it is to require there be a single approval process, single permitting process that you can't get lost across multiple agencies. This is where it's worked in some states. And as an example right now is at the federal government, there's something called the FAST Act. The FAST Act was something the last two administrations have both tried to find ways to increase infrastructure. The FAST Act has sped up infrastructure approvals by 2.3 years and saved billions of dollars by being able to get the infrastructure in case moving much faster. But for me, the most important thing is to streamline the approvals and get one agency to own the approvals, and if it needs to go to multiple agencies, it has to be done in a way that it gets streamlined and sped up. This is definitely the most frustrating thing when you speak with the construction companies, with the financial institutions, with the designers, with architects, with et cetera, et cetera. The thing they're most frustrated with is permitting.
I would add in there just the consistency of process. Be clear what the process is. It is based on these regulations, these laws, with a target time frame with which there can be some certainty to be able to start investing. With these large infrastructure projects, you are investing years before you put it in, and you hire the construction contractors, and so when the time frames go or the process isn't clear, it ends up extending on for a very long time. So clarity of process and consistent, clear time frames.
Can I add one more other point, which is since we have so many governors here, sometimes the other aspect that really slows it down is when an infrastructure project crosses state boundaries. So if you have a bridge or a tunnel that goes between two states, that also can really slow it down, because sometimes you're going to have two states with their approval processes with multiple agencies on both sides of the border. Maybe there's county approvals, city approvals, et cetera, and you look across all the different agencies approving it, it can be very difficult. So I'd also recommend that the governors, in the spirit of this new program, find ways to cooperate when infrastructure crosses state boundaries.
Well, it's a very good point. We're just in the process. We've just approved a major interstate agreement with the state of Virginia on the Capital Beltway here surrounding Washington. Governor Northam and I are doing a new American Legion bridge that connects the two states across the Potomac River. I had a good discussion yesterday with many of the Canadian premiers who are going to be joining us in the next panel about bridges connecting across borders. And so it's a big discussion about how we do this. It's difficult enough to get infrastructure done within a state, but when you're dealing across states and across international borders, it's even more confusing. And dealing with local governments as well.
Governor Hogan. Yep. First, Sarah, I think you omitted notice that you are, I think, the first female F-18 combat pilot. So not bad from a girl from Butte. Oh. Sure.
Not bad.
I'd also, though, one of the things you did say is, like, when you're looking at where to place something, you do look at the base infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And we see that in business. We also see that in the livability of our communities. That's why so many of the state governors, like we passed our largest infrastructure package in our state's history a year ago. Over 30 states have increased the gas tax at the state level just in the last 6 years. But states can't do this alone either. All of you that think about this a lot, in addition to permitting reform, what do you think our country's expectations and governors' expectations should be out of the federal government when it comes to more comprehensive infrastructure package?
Yeah, I look at this as their federal government does have a critical role, especially in roads, ports, airports. We talk about you're in the flight industry, you're in the natural gas and energy industry. This is where you also have national interests. When it comes to the FAA, we're looking at what will be the current system to manage air travel and air traffic controller. And the system it's pretty old. There needs to be a comprehensive effort. It could never be done by the states. The only way you could ever upgrade and update the entire air traffic control system in the United States would have to to be done by the federal government. Similarly, the road system, the last time that the transportation bill was passed, there was a convoluted way to find financing for it. The states need to put pressure on the federal government to build the roads that are the national road system. The same goes with some of the rail systems. So the national government does have a critical role to play, especially in transportation.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our panel for this wonderful discussion. Thank you very much for joining us. Very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really good.
Thanks, Governor.
Now, while we switch out in between panels, just draw your attention to the screens. We'll have a short video as we switch some chairs out before we get to our Canadian premieres. I think they're going to dim the lights and show you a film. One of the things that makes America exceptional is that when we see something that's broken, we go out and fix it, or at least we try to. The time to fix America's infrastructure is now. We just simply can't wait any longer.
A new report from the American Society of Civil Engineers gives the nation's infrastructure a D+.
The federal government needs to spend large sums of money to repair and rebuild America's infrastructure.
It's important at the national level, at the state level, and at the local levels.
4 million miles of roads and more than 600,000 bridges across the United States, in many cases crumbling faster than they can be repaired.
It's something that, quite frankly, we haven't been able to get moving forward on in Washington.
There's bipartisan support for a plan, but on Capitol Hill, the divide is always over how to pay for it.
Everybody could agree that our crumbling roads and bridges and our inadequate infrastructure is something that needs to be addressed.
You could go to any major city in America and see roads and bridges and infrastructure that need to be fixed.
In fact, it's something that the White House and both houses of Congress on both sides of the aisle have been talking about.
The issue at hand, Paula, is infrastructure. Is bipartisanship possible there?
If they can't make any progress on this issue, on infrastructure, then it's unlikely they're going to be able to make any progress on anything.
Governors in every state are making progress and are moving forward with infrastructure projects.
Do you believe state by state this can be addressed?
There's disagreement among Republicans and Democrats about how to solve these problems, but we're actually getting things done in the states. In our state, for example, we're moving forward on every single top priority road project in the entire state and every jurisdiction.
Construction is underway to improve one of Maryland's busiest roadways in Montgomery County, Maryland.
Today, a major construction project starts that could impact your commute for years.
There is a new plan to ease congestion for about 700,000 drivers a day on 14 major roads and highways across Maryland.
We have 800 road projects under construction, totaling $9 billion. We have $14 billion invested in transit. All of America's infrastructure is aging and underinvested in, and we're trying to take a look at solutions for all of these issues and problems that states across America are dealing with, and issues that we haven't really addressed at the national level. So we've been holding infrastructure summits in various cities around the country and around the world. We've already been to Boston, to Detroit, San Francisco. We went to Australia, who really has done a tremendous job with respect to infrastructure and public-private partnerships on rebuilding their infrastructure. The private sector has been investing billions of dollars for a long, long time and helping state and federal government rebuild their infrastructure without tax increases. We're getting the best input from around the country and from around the world to try to figure out all of the possible solutions to our infrastructure crisis. So our initiative on rebuilding America's infrastructure isn't just about transportation. It's really about rebuilding all of America's infrastructure. So we're talking about our infrastructure on the grid. We're talking about cybersecurity. We're talking about water systems. And all of America's infrastructure is aging and underinvested in. Maybe we could come up with a set of recommendations to make for the folks in Washington to see if we can't find some bipartisan, common sense solutions to recommend to them. This is about helping people's everyday lives. Those people that are stuck in soul-crushing traffic every day, that are missing soccer games, that aren't able to spend time with their families. We want to get them home from work, back home with their families. They're not being productive in our economy when they're sitting stuck in traffic. I really want to thank all of the governors and all of the staff who's worked so hard on this initiative, for participating, for helping us on this very important initiative for MGA.